week. Some people call it the tribulation period. I don't think that's a proper term to use for that period. We know there is, in the latter half, there's a period of great tribulation that comes on the world. That's according to the prophecy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 24. But so I try to use the term 70th week. I know people call it the tribulation period. But anyway, we know that there are certain events that occur, things that we talk about. For example, and I'll mention a little bit about this today, the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the prophecy of Isaiah 17 about the destruction of Damascus. And there are different theories as to when the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39 takes place. The Gog-Magog invasion, and who are involved in that. There are some that are easy to identify that are involved in that invasion. There are some that are a little bit more difficult. So there are different views on that. Some people think it takes place before the beginning of the 70th week. There are some people who think that it takes place in the early part of the 70th week, like in the first 40 days or so of the 70th week. Some think that it takes place fairly, maybe several years before the 70th week begins. And then there's a what I call the new gap theory that takes place between that war and the beginning of the 70th week. Others think somebody like Joel Richardson thinks that the Gog-Magog war is near the end of the 70th week and is part of sort of the overall giant war that takes place that eventually culminates in Armageddon. Although there are differences between what Ezekiel 38 and 39 describes and the War of Armageddon. And then there are others that I think get a little confused, and they say, well, the Gog-Magog war only happens at the end of the millennium. Because there is in Revelation, in the latter chapters of Revelation, there is talk about a Gog war that happens then. And what I think is that there's two of these Gog-Magog wars. I think you can easily make the case for that, especially with the way that Ezekiel is put together. So there's a lot of different views, and boy, everybody, you say anything about it, you present the other views, and everybody gets on your case about, there's only one war, and it's at the end of the millennium, and you don't understand, so we'll know when it happens. And all I'm saying is that all of the players that are described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 are lining up. So depending on your view as to whether it's before the beginning of the 70th week, early in the 70th week, or later in the 70th week, it would seem that when you see all these people line up, that you really ought to be paying attention, because things could happen. And when these things happen, and we've mentioned this before, Jewish scripture, and our scriptures have a Jewish base to them, talk about a pattern. So what happened, so the patterns that you see before the first coming of Jesus will be similar to the patterns that you see before the second coming of Jesus. And we know that before the first coming of Jesus, there was a very long period of time where all of these prophecies were put out by the Jewish prophets. There was then a period of 400 years of silence. Then we have Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew relates things that come on the scene, like the prophecy to Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. And so what we saw then was we saw prophecies about the first coming of the Messiah start to be fulfilled. Then there were prophecies that were also made about the ministry of the Messiah, about Jesus. And there were fulfillment of those prophecies from the Old Testament that were fulfilled during the ministry of Jesus Christ. But with regard to all of those prophecies about the first coming of Christ, about 60% of those were fulfilled in just that last week of his life, before his crucifixion, burial, resurrection, and then ascension into heaven. So what we can take from that is, if there's this sort of this exponential fulfillment of Bible prophecy in the first coming of Christ, there will be an exponential fulfillment prophecy with regard to the second coming of Christ. That's why we talk about the convergence of events, or the exponential, the accelerating nature of how these prophecies are going to be fulfilled. And when we live in a world, as we've titled this thing today, called A World in Disarray, it's clear that as we get closer to all of these events taking place, it's going to be a bit chaotic. And I would say that I don't think it's hard to make the case. I'm a lawyer. If I was going into court to make the case that the world is chaotic, I don't think it would be very difficult to make. In fact, if the judge said, Mr. Haller, you have 15 minutes to make your case, I could do that. But since there's no judge here that's going to put a time limit of 15 minutes on me, I can take a little bit of extra time. And we use this verse a lot, and there are other passages that we could use. We could use 2 Thessalonians 2:3 that talks about the falling away. But Paul admonished Timothy near the end of his life, preach the word, be instant in season, near the end of Paul's life, preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. And would someone please get me a bottle of water? And I'm going to thank you in advance, because last week I was admonished that I needed to say please and thank you. So thank you very much for doing that, and please accept my apology for last week, and thank you for accepting my apology for not doing that last week. So I think I've covered myself there. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. That is probably, this deception in the church, false teaching in the church, is probably the thing that is most indicative of the last days. In addition to that, we have this sort of disruption in culture. Now, my wife told me, you don't have to comment on everything just because, thank you very much. Now I'm going to have to take a break to go to the restroom if I drink all this, which I won't. So, thank you. My wife says, you don't need to comment on everything just because it's happening. So I'm not taking her advice. Judge Roy Moore. There has been it's very chaotic in Hollywood, in politics, and these charges of sexual harassment and improper conduct and that sort of thing, and they're going after everybody. It's on the, and now they're going after Judge Moore, who's a candidate for the Senate from Alabama. If he is removed from the election to replace Senator Sessions, that seat could go to a Democrat. That changes the balance of power. That affects appointment of judges, that type of thing, especially because you have some Republicans who are not very committed to following a Republican president's agenda because they don't like the president. And you have chaos, even more chaos you will see than you have right now. So listen, I don't know whether the allegations against Judge Moore are true or not. They've been around. This guy has run for office numerous times. To my knowledge, these have never come up before. I would only say, and I look at it, I don't think he did a very good job in his interview on Hannity the other night. I don't get to vote for him or not, so I guess my opinion doesn't make any difference anyway. But it will cause a lot of what cultural agenda that people want to see enacted if he drops out of the race. I mean, I think if he got elected, he would support a conservative cultural and judicial agenda. I have no doubt about that. I would also note that all the people that are yelling for him to withdraw from the office, where were you because of this conduct that happened years ago? Where were you with regard to Bill Clinton? Stop being that is the definition of hypocrisy. And I will give the guy on MSNBC, I saw him say the other night, he said exactly that. He said, we Democrats, we act so self-righteous about this now when it's regard to Judge Moore. Where were we when Bill Clinton. Chris Hayes, I think, is the guy's name. And I give props to the guy for having come out and said that. So I think you need to pray about this situation. I've personally been involved in investigations of this type, and it's very difficult to determine who's telling the truth, particularly with regard to what I would call stale allegations that haven't been brought up for decades. It's hard to find out whether it's true or not. So I'm not going to say whether I believe him or not. I'm just going to say what happens is we're going to have more chaos in Washington. But look, if having lived a perfectly sinless life is the test, then everybody in Washington needs to go home. And maybe that would be a good thing. Because, I mean, listen, John McCain being self-righteous about anything with regards to somebody's personal life, with the way he treated his first wife and admittedly cheated on her and that type of thing, he just needs to be quiet. I could say that in a little bit more stark terms, but my wife doesn't like me to say that he needs to do what you would say other than be quiet. And I think it takes a lot of nerve for somebody like him to come into this. So, it's a situation I think we need to pray about. This is something that I saw in the Canadian newspapers. Edmonton Christian couple says adoption nixed over views on sexuality. And this is from the secular paper. This is what they've reported. They filed a case about this. The casework supervisor explained that our religious beliefs regarding sexuality were incompatible with the adoption process, says an affidavit filed in support of an application for a judicial review of the government's decision. The casework supervisor said this stance was the official position of the Alberta government. The couple said they were also asked how they would deal with a child who was questioning his or her sexuality. They told officials that children should be taught that sexuality should not be experienced or explored until a person is an adult and is married. And that was unacceptable to the social workers in Alberta that were dealing with this. And they said, you can't adopt kids if that's your position. And so when I see all these allegations made against people by people who want to adopt this chaotic, unscientific, immoral position about what we teach with kids, there's a wide gap there between what they want to enforce on one side and what they won't enforce on the other side. It's an irresolvable conflict. Just let kids decide. And they want to teach kids as like 3 years old that you can decide whether you want to be a boy or a girl. In fact, I think it's Norway. I read this week an article that in Norway, if the parents are in conflict over whether a kid should identify as a boy or girl, it's going to be decided by a judge or someone outside of the family. Now, where do you think they're going to come down on that? Whatever's popular, it's just, this is where it's hard for me to say the words. I start stuttering because the chaos that's being caused in our culture by these policies is just, it's insane. It's just, there's just no other doubt about it. So I'm going to play for you a clip today. Now, last week I played for you some clips of Kenneth Copeland, and following up on the thing he did with Tony Palmer several years ago about how the Reformation is over. It's over. So we don't need to do the Reformation anymore. Let's just, all Catholics and Christians, evangelicals are the same. We should ignore these differences. So one of the people that comes up in this a lot is a guy named Todd White. And you're going to see some clips of Todd White, some clips of Benny Hinn, and some other things that occurred. So this is about a 5-minute segment. Endure to the end. He that endures to the end. We'll get to hear the rest of what I have to say this week. But I want you to listen carefully to this because there's a lot of people go, oh, Todd White's not that way, and I was challenged by somebody this week in a Facebook group. Why don't you post something about what Todd White believes on this? I don't believe you that Todd White would be this way. Todd White is part of this, the Bethel Church, the New Apostolic Reformation, whatever they're calling themselves now, these apostles who go out, of whom people like Benny Hinn, Randy Clark, John Arnott, Todd White, Bill Johnson, all of these people identify themselves as apostles. I played you some clips of a recent conference they had. And so here's Todd White on his own personal Lifestyle Christianity channel this week, introducing his good friend.
We're here at the future home of Lifestyle Christianity, the training center where we're going to do that school. And I have the privilege of introducing one of the amazing fathers in the body of Christ. Actually, he's really special to me. And I've just for years and years since I've been saved have just looked at the rock solid ministry of Kenneth Copeland and Gloria Copeland and just what they've done for the body of Christ. And I'm overwhelmed with the fact that he would even be here.
Now, the response to that will be, oh, John, you don't understand. Todd White doesn't believe what Kenneth Copeland believes about the Reformation being over. Okay? So this is from, this is from another post on his website.
My life is laced with so much scripture because I live in it. I'm not making this thing up. You will hear so much scripture come out of my mouth because I live in it. My days are saturated with understanding and growing in who God says I am. I read the Bible not so I can preach a sermon. I don't read the Bible so I can teach you. Never read your Bible so you can teach people. You read the Word, you get in there and you say, God, this is who you say I am. I need to become what this book says. God, place this inside of me so that I can become a living epistle, known and read by men. Not because of my quote, not because I finished scripture, not because I've memorized it. God did not tell you to memorize it. He told you to become it.
Okay, here's the deal.
Okay, and he will go on. I've seen videos where he says, I'm sinless. Okay? And this is part of, you hear this, people say, live the gospel, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. That's a phrase you hear a lot these days. And I'm pretty sure that if most of us were honest, that, if we said something like that on Sunday, just look at my life and how I live, by Tuesday noon, everybody's going to be pretty disappointed with you. Because why? Because the only sinless person was Jesus Christ. And that is who we look to. He is what? The author and the finisher of our faith. Not me and not Todd White. And did you notice when he was talking about that? I, my life, I'm so filled with Scripture, it just oozes out of me, and look how holy and wonderful and perfect I am. And this is what is taught in this branch of the so-called church. So now he's going to get into, okay, does he agree with Kenneth Copeland on Catholicism all being part of this or not?
I believe that the Catholic Church and the Christian Church, we're going to come together right now. In the name of Jesus, God, for a mighty baptism on the Catholic Church, God. And so,
okay, now we're going to go to a Catch the Fire conference, which took place at the John Arnott Church in Toronto, Canada. I'm pretty sure this happened in Toronto. Arnott used to be, I believe, was the pastor of, or associate pastor of, the Vineyard Christian Fellowship, Airport Vineyard Fellowship in Toronto, Canada. Back in, it's hard to believe it was this long ago, 1991. They started one of the places where it really got its start and build up was at the Airport Vineyard in Toronto, the Laughing Revival. And then that soon evolved into people getting down and barking like dogs and that type of thing. And it was so bad that even John Wimber, who initially embraced the founder of the Vineyard movement, originally was a Calvary Chapel guy. Chuck Smith was very concerned about how he was doing it. So he left and started the Vineyard Fellowship. We have a lot of vineyards around here. And Wimber was into the signs and wonders movement. And to my knowledge, I don't know that that's changed in the Vineyard, but it got so weird at Toronto that they eventually disfellowshipped that vineyard. But initially it was embraced. Guys like the Kansas City Prophets were embraced by John Wimber. So now here is John Arnott, 25 years later, standing up at the Catch the Fire conference, and he's going to introduce yet another one of these people, and you'll see who it is.
Benny Hinn has agreed to come back Sunday morning and to be with us, and I want us to give him a great welcome to Catch the Fire on Sunday morning, my dear friend Benny Hinn. Come on, dear brother. It's all yours. Thank you.
Now here's something I found that will blow your mind in many ways. They just released a study. This will bless Bruno, I think. They just released a study that more people are healed in the Catholic Church than Pentecostal churches. No, it's a fact. That's an absolute fact. The studies have proven it. Because Catholic people revere the Eucharist. More people get healed in a Catholic church during communion than Pentecostals during church attendance or communion, because to us it's symbolic. Well, Jesus didn't say, this is symbolic of my body. He said, this is my body. He didn't say, this is symbolic of my blood. He said, this is my blood. And I believe, I always have believed that in the spirit it is his body. In the spirit it's his blood. So you revere it. There's healing in communion. Absolutely. I've seen it happen in my own ministry. And there's healing in the Catholic churches because these people are devoted and show up every Sunday. They don't church hop. We hop, they don't. That's why we're sick and many of them are healed. Miraculous, powerful stuff going on in those churches, Catholic churches. People just miracles like you can't believe. Miracles are breaking out today in Coptic churches in Egypt for the same reasons. You ought to go on YouTube and look up Father Macari. He'll blow your head off in a good way. You'll see miracles you can't believe in his ministry. I met that amazing man, Macari. Just put the word Macari. MCC or MKK, it'll come out, whatever. There's not a whole lot of Macaris out there. You'll see the miracles. You see the people getting free from demons by the thousands. Muslims come into his meetings and he walks with his cross and chants in the Coptic language and sticks his cross on their heads and they get healed. Wow.
Now we're going to go to, I think it was the end of September, early October, middle of October, just a few weeks ago, a conference that took place, and you'll see some of the intro here, and then you're going to see what some of it took place at that conference. I want you to look carefully. So, listen, we've established that Tony Palmer, Kenneth Copeland, John Arnott, Benny Hinn, Todd White, all accept this ecumenical, we're all one church, it doesn't make any difference. Our doctrinal differences are irrelevant, and Benny Hinn even teaches that there's healing in the Eucharist. This is not evangelical Christianity, people. This is not hard to prove. If you believe they are, wake up. They are false teachers. They've identified and marked themselves. And people need to avoid them. So here's this Apostles' Conference in Lancaster, PA, a month ago.
The sound is growing. Let your voice be heard.
Voice of the Apostles in Lancaster. Okay, it was just exactly a month ago. Now, this is Randy Clark. There's not I want you to hear some of the audio, but you'll see Randy Clark, who was one of the Laughing Revival guys 25 years ago. He's laying hands on people. I want you to watch what happens. There's Bill Johnson there to the left. Okay, and that went on for 20, 25, 30 minutes. That's not biblical. I would suggest to you that that is demonic transference. Screaming like that, like you're being killed. So be careful with that. Here's another one. I thought maybe I'd hoped he had retired. He took a sabbatical, so he's back. Brian McLaren, who was one of the leaders of the emergent church. And listen, I've heard people say the emergent church movement failed. From my way of looking at it, I don't think it failed. I think it's infected the churches to the point where they can't even recognize how the emergent church movement, this postmodernism that came into the church through organizations like Leadership Network, with the assistance of Willow Creek and other movements, these people were brought into the church. Now, I want you to read. Let me tell you whether this guy's coming from a Christianity perspective or some other perspective. So this is Brian McLaren. He wrote a book. This is his article, The Last Reformation and the Next Reformation. He has a new book out called The Great Spiritual Migration, How the World's Largest Religion is Seeking a Better Way to be a Christian. And this is a theme that he's been writing about for over a decade. And all these people bought into it. I was even in a meeting once where people were planning a conference. And they said, hey, we ought to invite Brian McLaren. And I was like, it was a pastor that said this. I'm like, are you out of your mind? I mean, really? Do you know what this guy stands for? Do you know what he's going to do to the Christian faith? But it was new and fresh, and I guess that's what counts more than anything else. Listen to what he says in this article. The last Reformation is said to have begun on an identifiable day, October 31st, 1517, corresponding to a single identifiable event. Luther, and this is probably the most historically accurate that I've ever heard Brian McLaren, because history doesn't matter to him, because history is whatever he accepts as true. Corresponding to a single identifiable event, Luther's nailing 95 theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. In fact, the conditions for the Reformation had been building for more than a century. Similarly, the next Reformation has been building for over 100 years and is gaining momentum as we speak. And there's a lady named Phyllis Tickle who goes out and says exactly this thing. Phyllis Tickle tickles the ears. Okay, just that's how you remember what she stands for. And she goes to these conferences like Wild Goose and Emerging Church conferences and talks about this. This is new great Reformation that's coming on the Christian faith. Because we need a new thing. Every 500 years, we got to reinvent things. And I think that's her thesis. And this is a recent article that McLaren wrote on the Patheos blog. So, the last Reformation associated with one great man, Martin Luther. He was joined by other great men, all white and European. And there's Brian McLaren up in the right-hand corner, and the implication of this is white European men you shouldn't pay attention to. Why should we listen to a white man like Brian McLaren is my question. The next Reformation will be associated not with one great man, but with many diverse people, especially women and people of color. The contribution of liberation theology, black theology, feminist, ecofeminist, womanist, queer, and related theologies will be as central to the next Reformation as white European theology was to the last Reformation. And I'm sure he adopted that when he married his son in a gay wedding ceremony. The last Reformation occurred just over 50 years after the doctrine of discovery was articulated by Pope Nicholas V, unleashing the era of the conquistadors and colonizers and fueling their white Christian supremacy. The next Reformation is occurring just over 50 years after the Holocaust and the First Nuclear War, both of which demonstrated the genocide to which white Christian supremacy naturally led. If the First Reformation was a feature of the period of colonialism and white Christian supremacy, what's his God? Marxism, right? Leftism. The next Reformation will be a post-colonial reality that seeks to dismantle supremacy in all of its forms, except for my supremacy. The last Reformation was born between Copernicus and Galileo, and its theology matured in the era of Sir Isaac Newton, an area of certainty, laws, duality, and linearity. The next Reformation is being born in the aftermath of Darwin, Freud, Einstein, Heisenberg, Crick, and others, an era of possibility, I should say an era of possibility, development, multiplicity, and systems. It will reincarnate Christian faith in this new universe, which is at least as different from the modern universe as the modern universe was from its pre-modern antecedent. The last Reformation challenged the infallible authority of a single male hierarchy headed by one man by establishing multiple male hierarchies by establishing multiple male hierarchies headed by many men. It replaced an infallible pope with an inerrant Bible, papal authority with paper authority, an absolute monarch with an absolute constitution. It was aided in this process by a new technology, the modern printing press. Do you see how by letting this stuff into the church unchallenged, in many instances, how it has wrecked the faith of the millennial generation and others, even older? It's a train wreck. I don't understand, like I said last week, I don't understand why there aren't people shouting from the pulpits of America, stop this nonsense, this is heresy. I don't hear it that often. There are blogs that take care of it, but by and large, I don't know. The next Reformation challenges male authorities with diverse voices and a suspicious hierarchies altogether, preferring organizations that are accountable to their members. It is being aided in this process by new technologies, especially the internet and podcasts. So that's where you have it. And so today we're going to talk about A World in Disarray. Now, this is a new book by Richard Haass, Council on Foreign Relations. He's very much a one world order person, new world order person, a globalist, if you will. And in the era of Trump, he's like freaking out. And he's on Fareed Zakaria's GPS show today on CNN. But American foreign policy and the crisis of the old order. And so we'll talk about this for the time I have remaining, because there's some things going on that I think fit into the prophetic scriptures pretty well. We know that the players in this Ezekiel 35, 38, Ezekiel 38 and 39 attack on Israel come from the north with some coalition from the south, and that the players appear to be, if we put them into modern terms, Turkey, Iran, probably Russia. Syria is not mentioned, by the way, which is kind of interesting because even though all of our maps still say Syria, there's really not a Syria. There's really not an Iraq. And there's soon to be, maybe, based on some of the things I've been seeing over the last week, there may not be a Lebanon very much longer. So things are changing. And this has been the course of history, but they're all changing in a way. The difference is that Israel's there today. And I think that's the big difference from a Bible prophecy timeline. So here's what happened is Turkey has moved in. Turkey is the Syrian Kurdish groups have the purple. Turkey doesn't like the Kurds. They think the Kurds are a problem for them. And so what they've done is they've moved into this area here in the little square on the left to the west of Aleppo, north of Idlib. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to use terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda affiliate groups in that area as a buffer to the expansion of the Kurds any further. And it's very interesting to watch the geopolitics of this because Russia's sort of letting it happen, but they're sort of telling Turkey, don't go too far. Iran and Turkey would like to get rid of the Kurds, the Kurdish problem, because it's a political problem for Iran because there's a lot of Kurds in Iran. And what we used to call Iraq, there's a lot of Kurds there. And we know that the Kurds voted for their independence in Iraq. And what happened was Iran didn't like it, so they attacked the Kurds at Kirkuk, and they moved them back. And essentially told, and we didn't really do it, we didn't step in to help them. And the Kurds have been supported for a long time in their efforts by the United States and Israel. And this is, the whole area still remains in chaos. This is from the Institute of Study War. Just listen to this. Turkey is cooperating with al-Qaeda to threaten the Syrian Kurdish YPG in northern Syria. Turkish President Erdogan's intervention in Idlib province is setting conditions for a de facto safe haven for jihadists in Syria that will jeopardize the U.S. campaign against al-Qaeda. Turkey instead intends to use its intervention as a launch pad for future operations against the majority Kurdish Afrin canton in northern Syria. Turkish President Erdogan stated that the next stage of TSK operations will, that's his forces, the Turkish forces, will focus on the issue of majority Kurdish Afrin canton. Turkey also seeks to regulate refugee flows and humanitarian aid along the Syrian-Turkish border in Idlib province ahead of anticipated pro-Bashar al-Assad regime clearing operations. So he doesn't like Assad either. So there's all these little forces playing together. And you have this, what's left of Syria, kind of interesting issues. And you'll see more about that as we get into this. So this week, in addition to that, there were some, along this border here, there were other issues. See, I got to find my, okay. Russia moves in because they don't like the way things are going along the border there in the border region on Turkey. Russia is attempting to leverage these deployments to preempt a potential Turkish offensive targeting the YPG. So Russia is trying to hold Turkey back. Russia also seeks to expand its partnership with the YPG to constrain and ultimately expel the U.S. from northern Syria. Russia is actively attempting to co-opt the YPG into a diplomatic rapprochement with the Syrian President Assad at the expense of the U.S. anti-ISIS coalition. The U.S.-YPG partnership is vulnerable following the U.S. decision to support Baghdad over the Kurdistan regional government's independence operations in northern Iraq. Russia could successfully exploit this seam to deprive the U.S. of its primary source of influence in Syria. Russia is also positioning to frustrate Erdogan's strategic ambitions in northern Syria, driving Turkey into deeper partnership with al-Qaeda. In other words, it's complicated. And I've said this before, the Persians invented chess, the Russians perfected it, and a lot of times we're playing checkers. And you're using checkers on a chessboard. When they're using chess pieces, you're just not going to get very far. Trump is in Asia this week. This is a suggestion from the Financial Times that he wanted to maybe take some of the Great Wall back, maybe do a deal for it. So let's look at the most important thing, I think, though, that took place this week. And this is, boy, there's so much that I could say about this. And this was starting to happen a week ago. I mean, a week ago today, we had the church shooting in Texas. And it's sort of already forgotten. Really, I mean, it's just not that important in the scheme of things. Because last week, a geopolitical earthquake happened in that the new crown prince, with the support, obvious support of his father, King Salman, Mohammed bin Salem, that's Mohammed, son of Salem, has moved to purge people from various positions in, princes have been arrested, 11 princes have been arrested, a couple hundred other people, many ministers in the Saudi government have been detained. This is a interesting history. My update's going to be a little shorter this week because I spent a lot of time reading the back history of Saudi Arabia. It pretty soon devolves into, you need a lot of charts to track who's who and who's the son of who and who's the half-brother, full brother, who's the nephew, because of the intermarrying that takes place in this tribal culture. In 1882, there was no country called Saudi Arabia. This is a picture, a postcard, an engraving that was done of Mecca about 1882, published in 1882. As you can see, you have the Kaaba there, you have the Great Mosque, but it's not that spectacular building that we see now, which has one of the tallest buildings on the planet overlooking it, with the world's largest shopping mall. The Royal Clock Tower in Mecca. In about 1935, this is what the Kaaba looked like. So from 1882 to 1935, it didn't change that much. And we know what it looks like now. And there's all this building going on and all these plans. And the Saudis are really working to make Mecca one of the great destinations of the world, as long as you, of course, are Muslim. If you're not a Muslim, you can't go there. So I pulled out a bunch of charts about the development of Saudi Arabia. On the Arabian Peninsula is a very tribal culture, and a tribal culture, family is very important. And so if you go back into the Saud history, you see Muhammad back there, 1744 to 1765. By the way, at this period of time in 1882, up until about 1932, the holy sites of Mecca and Medina were under the Hashemite kingdom. The Hashemite tribe controlled those holy places. They were taken over by the Saud family in the early 1930s. Now, the Hashemite kingdom, the Hashemite family, was given a sort of consolation prize when they were driven out of the Arabian Peninsula, and you now know them as the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. King Abdullah of Jordan considers himself, they trace their lineage as direct descendants from the Prophet Muhammad. Whether it's true or not, that's what they claim. And the Saudis, the Arabs there, they also do the same, and they all go back to Ishmael, the son of Abraham. And remember that Esau married a daughter of Ishmael. So there you have sort of a convergence of those lines. That's where the Edomites come from and that sort of thing. So about 1932, it became known as Saudi Arabia. Abdul Aziz took it over. He was born, he ruled in his area. He was born about 1876. He died in 1953. You see him down here just above the bottom line. He had, it's hard to know. They think he was born about 1876. There weren't really any records kept. He had about 23 wives, somewhere 21, 23 wives. And how bright is that, really? And many other women that he had relations with and children with. He had somewhere, the estimates are 37 to 45 sons by those 23 wives. There is one faction called the Sudahari faction. That was his favorite wife. He had 7 sons by that wife. And the current King Salman is one of those 7. They call him the Sudahari 7 in Saudi Arabia. And I believe King Fahd was also one of the Sudahari 7. King Abdullah was not. All of the kings, when he died, since he died in 1953, 64 years ago, all of the kings of Saudi Arabia have been the sons, the direct son of King Abdullah Aziz Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. And what was interesting was that back in the 30s, like when this picture was taken, many of the people within the royal family of Saudi Arabia were destitute. They were bone-crushingly poor. But what happened in 1937? Oil was discovered in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and the oil revenues started to come in. And so what happened was that the first king, King Saud, 53 to 64, the first successor to the founder of Saudi Arabia, his son took over, and he was a lousy king. He couldn't grasp the wealth that was coming in from the oil revenues, and he was deposed by his family in 1964, and he lived a few more years after that. And he was succeeded by King Faisal. King Faisal was assassinated in 1975 by a nephew. The nephew was summarily executed. That's sort of how they deal with those problems in Saudi Arabia at that time, and even up until today. Then King Khalid, King Fahd, King Abdullah, and then King Salman, who came on the scene in 2015. Here's another chart to kind of show this a little bit. So you see here the different sons of the king, some of whom have been, again, he had, other than these, he had 35 to 40 other sons, the founder of Saudi Arabia. He was very, what you would say, he was very prolific, productive. And one of the things that, even in those days, the Saudis did was they had slaves. Shocking to you, isn't it? They had slaves. They had black African slaves. They had other, even white minorities were served as slaves in the Saudi kingdom. And it was brutal. And these guys, a lot of them had children by these different slaves. In fact, the story is that Salman bin Abdulaziz, that means Salman, son of Abdulaziz, that's Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the son of Saud. So his son Salman, the current king, had a child that had dark skin by one of his, we'll call him a concubine. The mother hid that child from Salman for many years. The child then went to meet the king and has not been seen since. So Salman has a number of wives. Let's see if I have a little bit better. This is very complicated. It's fascinating, though. Here's a little bit. You'll see here. There's a. You see here Talal bin Abdulaziz. Talal, 4 in from the right. His son is Al-Walid bin Talal. He is probably the richest of the Saudi princes. And you can imagine how many of these guys are. So Abdulaziz ibn Saud had 40, 45 sons. I mean, I didn't include the daughters, okay? And what he did was he married a lot of these women from different tribes to cement relationships. And one of his big marriages was to the tribe from which we got the Wahhabi sect of Islam, which has led to a lot of the Islamic terrorism. So that's how that kind of came into the Saud family. So Talal had a son, Al-Walid bin Talal, and he's one of the richest people in the world. He's worth somewhere around $18 billion. He's a major stockholder in Fox. He owns Twitter, some other tech companies, and that sort of thing. And he's one of the guys who got arrested this week, and they're being held in the horrible conditions of the Ritz-Carlton, Riyadh. But I hear they're sleeping on mattresses without sheets. Okay, so this is, and if you ever stayed in a Ritz-Carlton or a Four Seasons, which I've been fortunate to do a few times when I've traveled on business, the sheets are pretty nice. And I remember I was staying at a Four Seasons, and I called my wife and I said, "You got to go buy new sheets because I can't come home and sleep on that scratchy stuff anymore." And bless her heart, she did it. She went and she found them on sale, and it's different. If you haven't experienced it, don't, because you'll have to go buy the stuff to take care of yourself. So there's a lot of intrigue in the house of Saud. King Solomon is 80 or 81. He was born in 1936. He has a younger brother, Prince Ahmed, born in 1941. He's the youngest of the direct sons, but he's one of the Sudiari seven. And you can see there King Fahd, Prince Sultan, Prince Naif, King Salman, and then Prince Ahmad. They're 5 of the 7 sons by this one wife, the favorite wife of Ibn Saud, or Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud, the founder of Saudi Arabia. And then, so if you have 45 sons, how many grandsons are you going to have when a lot of them have 20, 30, 40 children by multiple wives? So when you get into the grandson generation, you have, I've heard that it's like over 5,000 princes and princesses in the Saudi royal family. And that's a small town of just princes. And so the political intrigue gets pretty good. And to date, they've been pretty good at being ruled by consensus. But that changed a week ago. This is a geopolitical earthquake, I think, that we still don't understand. So what happened a week ago, King Solomon came on in 2015. He had a half-brother named Mukren, which when he became king in 2015, when King Abdullah died, he was the crown prince, so he became king, ascended to the throne January 2015. And if you remember, I think I played pictures or some video of President Obama went to the funeral went to Saudi Arabia shortly after the funeral of King Abdullah. And King Fahd before him, I think he had a stroke and he was disabled for many years. And so King Abdullah really served for much longer than 10 years. So King Solomon takes over and he appoints a crown prince, Mukren, however you say it, his half-brother. Now, where it's in the news right now is that also in this whole thing last week, a Saudi Prince Mansour was killed in a helicopter crash. Now, the cause is unknown. We don't know whether it was intentional. He was supposedly surveying land down near the Yemen border, which is the area of his government, Prince Mansour. But he is the son of Mukren. He was a nephew of King Salman. So the obvious implication is the helicopter crashed on purpose. There were 8 other Saudi government officials on the helicopter. They were all killed. Mukren was removed from being the crown prince in April of 2015, at which time Salman appointed 2 successors. The crown prince was Mohammed bin Naif, nephew, and Salman's son, Mohammed bin Salman. Now, just remember Mohammed bin Salman, a lot of people call him MBS, just because it's a lot to say. And until Pam and I were in Israel in May, and when we were in Israel in May, the crown prince was Mohammed bin Naif, and the deputy crown prince was MBS. But a few weeks after we got back, Mohammed bin Naif was removed as the crown prince, and Mohammed bin Salman, who was 32 years old at the time, was appointed as the crown prince. And now we have a bit of a chaos. Back in 2015, German intelligence reported that watch out for this MBS guy because he's on the rise and he's going to eventually take power. He's very ambitious. He's very intelligent. Obviously has a law degree. I mean, kind of goes without saying, right? And you can save all the lawyer jokes too. In Germany, the German government squelched this spy agency report pretty quickly, but it got out there. And now we see the results of it. In 2016, Bloomberg Businessweek put MBS on the cover because of what he had proposed. I played some clips of him a few weeks ago, talking about his Vision 2030, which Saudi Arabia Vision 2030. You can look that up on the internet. All the things they want to do, want to move from an oil economy to a tech economy to a modern economy. MBS has said, women are going to be able to drive yet. I don't think it's accurate to say that they're allowed to drive yet. They're studying it. And he's also said we're going to put in moderate Islam. Now, I'm concerned about people falling for this because I don't think it's accurate. I don't think it's true. So they've rounded all these people up. He now has essentially total power. They've put them into the Ritz, I think the Ritz-Carlton there in Riyadh. They have these ornate ceilings and everything. Here's just from one of the articles. This was, I think, from the Financial Times the other day. One estimate had said the authorities were looking to reclaim $800 billion, a sum that would fund Saudi plans for a massively expanded sovereign wealth fund to invest in new businesses. The Crown Prince has said that he is desperate to reform the kingdom and modernize the economy, weaning the country off its dependence on oil. And I know this came from the Financial Times because they spell modernize a different way than spell it like it sounds. Another well-known figure detained is Bakr bin Laden, brother of the late Al-Qaeda leader Osama and head of the family's construction business firm, the country's biggest. Saudi bin Laden, as it is formerly known, has also been in a dispute with the government over what it says is a huge unpaid bill for building work that the authorities could not afford to pay because of the fall of the price of oil. Now, remember back in May, Pam and I were in Israel, and while we were there, Donald Trump took his first foreign visit to a foreign country. And the place that he went was Saudi Arabia. Now, it was listen to what the Financial Times or Foreign Policy says about this. Now that the boy wonder Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman has accelerated his ascent to the throne through a series of wide-scale purges last weekend and reckless foreign policy moves abroad, both of us are feeling nostalgic for the good old days when the Saudis were scared of their own shadow. Even former Secretary of State Baker, who courted the Saudis for obvious reasons during the Gulf War, exploded in frustration after the Saudis failed to deliver a promised public statement on the Arab-Israeli peace process. These guys could, word I can't say, up a two-car funeral. And a string of pretty now spectacular policy failures, Yemen, Qatar, and now Lebanon may not be far behind. MBS' most notable success abroad may well be the wooing and capture of President Donald Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Americans have long been infatuated with kings and the kingdom, but King Salman and MBS seem to have set a new land speed record in convincing the Trump administration that they hold the keys to war, peace, and the transformation of the region. And there's a Heritage interview that you can find, Heritage Foundation interview. I can't remember the name. You find it on YouTube. Just go to Heritage Foundation, go to the YouTube channel, and look for something that happened this week. Very interesting thing. And the guy at Heritage, who's a Saudi expert, says, listen, this is what we should expect. The Saudis like family. They're big on family. They don't have any trouble, getting rid of family when the need arises, but they're very big on the tribal custom and family. And they like the fact that Trump has his son-in-law in what appears to be now, to them, the family business. In fact, if you remember Netanyahu's speech at the Chatham House, the interview that he gave, when he went up to the map, or he was pointing at the map, he says, this is Persia over here, this is, clericals, and then he said, this, pointing behind him to Saudi Arabia on the map, that's a family business. And so the Saudis think of the American government now, because Trump has brought his son-in-law in, he's brought his daughter in, as a family business. And you remember some of the pictures that happened. But foreign policy is saying, now we have the Saudi Arabia we always wanted and feared, and now, well, Trump owns it because of what's happened. And there was a lot of criticism of Team Bush and the way they kowtowed to the Saudis over the years. And I would say the same concern should be about Team Trump and the way they kowtowed to the Saudis, because I don't for a minute believe that they're going to bring in a moderate form of Islam. It may appear at the beginning to be that. But what happened when Erdogan thought he could seize power with what people called moderate Islam in Turkey? What's happened? He's using it as a autocratic tool. I mean, do you think MBS is throwing his relatives in custody and confiscating assets and picking up accounts? Will do that. And it's interesting, the Neom, this big city that they want to build there along the Red Sea, and as I suggested to you, maybe connect through rails rather than go through the Suez Canal, go rail system across Israel to the Mediterranean, and everybody's excited about it. The estimated cost of that is $500 billion. Financial Times reports they're looking for $800 billion to confiscate from these corruption probes. It seems that there is a connection. They want to sell part of Saudi Aramco on the open market. It's estimated that that could bring in, 5% of it could bring in a couple $1 trillion. So there's a lot of money there. And now he's putting in, as this conference showed on, the Future Initiatives conference he had, bringing in artificial intelligence. They had a robot there that they've given citizenship to. I didn't misstate that. They have a robot, female, Sophie is her name. Sophie means wisdom, I guess. And they gave, I almost said her, they gave this robot that looks like a female citizenship in Saudi Arabia. So I guess she's going to become a taxpayer when she gets a job. And I don't know if you give her a hug, have you harassed her? Is your so remember the scenes. Trump went there. He received a medal from King Salman. And remember, at the time, the crown prince was the guy that you see between Trump and the king. And just a few weeks later, he's no longer the crown prince. MBS is the crown prince, and now we're here just 5 months later, and he's taking control. You see Jared Kushner, Melania Trump, Ivanka there. Oh, here's MBS on the right. And he looks like, to me, he looks like, you guys, just wait. Wait till I'm in charge, and just wait till I get control of this thing. Here's the Trump getting a medal. And this was that weird ceremony that they had at the terrorism monitoring center. They put their hands on this globe. It just was kind of strange. But you can see King Salman is elderly. He's using a cane there. And so that was just kind of an odd ceremony that they had. And there was a big, shortly after that, there was a big, in conjunction with that meeting, all the Islamic countries sent their representatives to Riyadh for a meeting. Held in opulence. Then Trump went on to Jerusalem, to the Western Wall, and here's what Financial Times said Sunday. A prime minister vanishes, a ballistic missile explodes, and the prime minister is Hariri of Lebanon, who resigned last week. I played you some of the video of that. Resigned as the prime minister of Lebanon. He did it while he was in Riyadh. He's not really been seen since, and now Lebanon and other countries of the world saying, hey, send Hariri back and we'll believe that he really resigned. So the conspiracy theorists are saying, oh, the Sauds have forced him to resign. This is calling it, and it says here, an Arab prince rounds up some of his relatives on corruption charges and detains them in a deluxe hotel where they sleep on cheap mattresses under ornate cornice ceilings. If it were a Hollywood script, producers would reject the plot as fanciful. I mean, it's not really, you can't put a story out in a movie like that because nobody would believe it. But this is what's happening. This is the world that we live in. But this week's story of greed and intrigue in Saudi Arabia, steered by its brash 32-year-old crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is anything but. So, and Trump tweeted, I have great confidence in King Salman and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. They know exactly what they are doing. This is very complicated. There is essentially, and has been for some time, I don't have time to play the video this morning. A pretty good video. I'll try to play it next week. Or if I ever do a midweek, I'll play it in the midweek. But there is all of these different forces effect, and there's a Cold War going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this has been going. And as this article says, where does this end up? Saudi, USA, Israel axis does not have a common goal like the Iran, Syria, Shia, Russian axis has a common goal, even when you throw in China into the mix. And the speculation on at least one commentator was this does not end well for Saudi Arabia and the others that are opposing these other organizations. So here's this article. This is also from the Financial Times. Middle East tensions soar as Iran and Saudi Arabia jostle for influence. And you can kind of see this chart here. Shows what Saudi Arabia is doing. They're going against Qatar. They've invaded Yemen. They've established ties with Egypt. They influenced the resignation of Lebanon. They're reaching out secretly to Israel. They've backed rebels in Syria. Shows what Iran is doing. It shows that this all kind of centers around this kind of war between Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia, Cold War. And what they're doing is they're using proxies. They don't fight directly. Okay, they use Syrian armies. They use Hezbollah. Iran does. Saudis, they arm some of the rebels there. They arm some of the rebels in Syria. And it's just this huge, huge mess. Saudi Arabia said Lebanon has declared war on it. The crisis has deepened. Now the king, Prince Salman, the pretty solid speculation is that King Salman will abdicate pretty soon and make MBS the king of Saudi Arabia. On the front page of the New York Times, while this is going on the front page of the New York Times this morning is this. Kushner-led team is forming an ultimate deal for Mideast peace. This is a fact, and there were many other stories about it this week. You can look them up. At the same time this was going on Shabbat, yesterday, Friday evening and Saturday, they had the largest number of Jews in Hebron in forever. 35,000 Jews in Hebron for Shabbat. I mean, we were there. There were a dozen in the synagogue there at Hebron. We were in the structure there at Machpelah. There's a synagogue and a mosque up there. And so they had 35,000 Jews in Hebron last night. This is enormous. And I did that thing on Hebron. Remember why Hebron matters? Because this is the area where Abraham actually bought the land. And it's where he's buried. And there's just no doubt about this. And then look at these headlines from the Jerusalem Post this morning, and then I'll finish with this. Obviously, I didn't keep it under an hour. And Israel intercepts a Syrian intel drone approaching the Golan. May have been a Russian drone. That kind of heightens the tensions. Israel is very protective of its territory. New Iranian military facility is reported near Damascus. Defense Minister Lieberman said Israel won't allow use of Syria as a forward base for the Shia axis. These are just from the front page of this morning's Jerusalem Post. Israel to embark on diplomatic offensive against Hezbollah and Iran at the United Nations. And then this one, Trump, Putin issue a statement for all sides to take part in Syria peace talks. And this was a statement issued by the State Department, U.S. State Department yesterday. And it just says they were in Vietnam, and Trump and Putin issued a joint statement that they're going to confirm their determination to defeat ISIS in Syria. They expressed their satisfaction with successful U.S.-Russia enhanced deconfliction efforts between U.S. and Russian military professionals that have dramatically accelerated ISIS losses on the battlefield in recent months. And ISIS is pretty much done as an entity. Presidents agreed that there is no military solution to the conflict in Syria. They confirmed that the ultimate political solution to the conflict must be forged through Geneva process pursuant to UN Security Council Resolution 2254. They also took note of President Assad's recent commitment to the Geneva process and constitutional reform and election as called for under 2254. The two presidents affirmed that these steps must include full implementation of 2254, including constitutional reform and free and fair elections under UN supervision, held to the highest international standards of transparency, with all Syrians, including members of the diaspora, eligible to participate. Well, I guess that would help because maybe we can identify where everybody went. But you need to understand, well, I'll make a comment in a minute. The presidents affirmed their commitment to Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, territorial integrity, and non-sectarian character as defined in 2254, and urged all Syrian parties to participate in the Geneva political process. Finally, President Trump and President Putin confirmed the importance of de-escalation areas as an interim step to reduce violence in Syria, enforce ceasefire agreements, facilitate unhindered humanitarian access, and set the conditions for the ultimate political solution to the conflict. Confirming what they had done in Hamburg, Germany back in July. The two presidents today welcomed the Memorandum of Principles concluded in Amman, Jordan on November 8th, 2017. That was what, Wednesday? Between the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, the Russian Federation, and the United States of America. This memorandum reinforces the success of the ceasefire initiative to include the reduction and ultimate elimination of foreign forces and foreign fighters from the area to ensure a more sustainable peace. Monitoring this ceasefire arrangement will continue through the Amman Monitoring Center with participation by expertise from Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Russia, and the United States. And this was kind of interesting. Recently, this is one of the recent covers of The Economist. The Tsar is born. Clever. And then endangered, America's future as a global power. So, all I can say is wowza. That's my official commentary. I think this all fits with Bible prophecy. I don't know exactly where it's going to go. I don't know exactly the outcome. It's very easy to make up a scenario. When we have time, maybe we'll do that, of how Ezekiel 38, how the Saudi Arabian thing fits within Ezekiel 38 and 39. Because in that indication, Sheba and Dedan, which is the area of Saudi Arabia, they're sort of standing back on the sidelines watching this confederation come against Israel, which certainly includes Persia and Turkey and probably Russia, the way I understand it, coming against Israel, and it's, but they're kind of standing back, Sheba and Dedan. Saudi Arabia is kind of saying, what are you guys doing? Why are you coming down here? You don't need to come down here. And it just seems like all this is set up for that. And so Saudi Arabia is now portraying itself as a very moderate influence. But what I see is this. We also know that there's this prophecy about Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus. Do I think that that's closer today than it was last week? The answer to that question is yes, I do, and here's why. If you look at the headline that's in the front page of the Jerusalem Post this morning, let me find it. It is... oh, here it is. new Iranian military facility reported near Damascus. It's about 25 kilometers from Kenitra, there along the Golan border with Israel. It's the southwest part of it's outside the southwest area of Damascus. There's a number of buildings. The description was it's a honeycomb of buildings that are being put there. It's a base being built by the Iranians. It's on Israel's border. We know there's this prophecy about the destruction of Damascus. How does that come about? It doesn't say exactly, but it comes about very quickly and suddenly. And Israel's been very clear. We will not allow Iran to get established on our border. I think 25 kilometers away, what's that, 30 miles, 32 miles? It's the other way. 15 miles? Okay. That's right, because it's about 35 or 40 kilometers from where you are in the Golan when you visit there to downtown Damascus. So, so I think it's 0.62 is the conversion factor. So it's pretty close. To me, that's on the border. And Israel says we won't do that. And at the same time, you have President Trump and Putin entering into this agreement about Resolution 2254 and Syria. And what do you see happen here? Israel's been further isolated. And they're being forced to do something. Now, if you go look at Damascus, half of Damascus is destroyed already. The Sunni parts were destroyed, the people driven out. That's the immigration problem. Will Israel destroy the rest of it just to protect themselves? I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, we're going to do what we need to do. It's very interesting. These scenarios that we sort of play out as to how Isaiah 17 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 might take place, they're coming every week. They get closer and closer. That's my view of a lot of other people. So interesting stuff. It's exciting to watch, and be in prayer, and you have a short time to share the gospel. Really, that's what I think. So let's pray and leave. Father, thanks so much for your word. Give us the peace of knowing that nothing that's happening is escaping your view, and that you are in control ultimately, even though it seems like it's chaotic around us. Give us that peace that passes understanding. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.